All right. Hello, everyone. Folks in our live studio audience or live virtual studio audience streaming in as we go here. Welcome to the Martech Show, the inaugural episode presented here on Zoom, which I'm sure you're all incredibly excited about. Recording this here on a Friday after everyone's had a full week of plenty of Zoom meetings. So I really appreciate you, coming on and doing one more. For those of you who are not catching this live, I guess you're watching this as a video recording of a Zoom, which has got to be at least equally as entertaining, or possibly even like an audio podcast version of a video recording of a Zoom meeting. Wow. Okay. Thank you for joining us for episode one. What could go wrong in episode one? First chance here of just learning the technology and the flow and the format. So appreciate you bearing with us. See, I'm even getting the slides going in the wrong direction. All right, there we go. I mentioned that episode one thing on Twitter, and people suggested, well, maybe you should just start with episode 4, which I can't believe I missed that opportunity. In the crazy, work from home environment, I have to say, I've come to really appreciate, finding humor where I can on Twitter in particular. There is humor on Twitter. You have to look for it, amidst all the other chaos there. A couple of weeks ago, there was the whole meme of, I have a joke, but there's some reason why I can't tell the joke. So, I have 8,000 jokes about Martech, but everybody says they should be consolidated. I have a joke that's a CDP, but everybody says their joke is a CDP. That one goes out inside baseball to David Robb. I have 2 jokes about Martech, but I can't get them to integrate. Wow, I mean, people actually really enjoyed this. I put this one up on LinkedIn, got like 1,000 likes, in a matter of hours. And I have to say, it's somewhat disappointing. I have these posts I put together that, I'll spend hours, doing this analysis and research and how do you describe this? I put it up there and it gets 5 likes. I make some offhand, snarky joke, it's like, oh yeah, wow, we love that. So, but it's good. I appreciate the feedback. Feedback, back and forth on these social channels is always entertaining. I was in a thread earlier in the week where, going back and forth over, a category definition, and some CMO who had jumped in, tagged what they thought was me in that thread. But it turns out that @Brinker Scott is not actually me. It's some other Scott Brinker living in Naperville, Illinois, who, just jumped in and said, well, you're not tagging the correct Scott Brinker. Actually, that wasn't all my doppelganger said. He actually was like, oh, not only that, I'm amazed that the marketing community cannot tag people correctly. Seems like it would be a basic marketing function that should be done correctly. So, wow, there's another Scott Brinker out there, and he's snarky about how marketing is using technology. I've got to meet this fellow. All right, anyway, on with the show, as they say. So if you happen to stumble across this completely by random, I'm Scott Brinker. I'm the editor of the chiefmartech.com blog, because editor just sounds, more sophisticated than blogger. I'm a blogger. And so the Martech show here is part of, the chiefmartech.com programming. I'm also the VP platform ecosystem at HubSpot, and the program chair of the Martech conference. Normally we have in-person conferences for the Martech conference. As with pretty much all in-person events, 2020 has not been the year for that, but we do have a great one, a virtual Martech coming up in the fall, October 6th through 8th. I am joined by 2 amazing people in the Martech industry. First, Jeff Ekman, who's the CEO of Blue Green. Hey, Jeff.
Hi.
So Blue Green has been my collaborators here on the Martech landscape for the past several years. I've also had the pleasure of working with Jeff on a number of Martech projects over, wow, well over a decade, my friend. It's great to be here with you. And then our sponsor for this show, Anita Brereton, who's the CEO of Cabinet M. Hi, Anita.
Hi, Scott. I love my halo.
Yes, well, I promised sponsors they would get a halo effect, from this show. So
there it is.
So yeah, we'll get a chance to talk in a little bit too about yeah, what you were doing with the sponsorship for this, because it is super cool. So this landscape, you know, the title for this episode was going to be, yeah, like, what the heck do you do with like 8,000 Martech solutions? This is the, yeah, 2020 version, the Martech landscape with 8,000 Martech solutions that the blue-green team, you know, did the production for. They, you know, researched all of these companies here and came up with this actually really groovy design. That immediately people on Twitter turned around and said was simply a, you know, like a map of Game of Thrones or something like that.
Yep.
You know, just so you know, like, you know, content marketing platforms always pay their debts. So that's what you need to know. But yeah, I mean, this landscape.
Put the R in Martech, Scott.
This landscape has just gone through, you know, an incredible exponential growth over the years, you know, starting 2011 with around 150 solutions up to 8,000 this year. And again, this isn't totally comprehensive. Like, we're constantly hearing about new Martech solutions. Yeah, actually, Jeff is going to have a bit of an update for us on that. But yeah, if you look over this, the past decade, it was 5,233% growth. That's just really incredible. So one of the things, yeah, Blue Green and myself did this year was we actually published the full list, the full database of these solutions. There's a martech5000.com site you can go to. And in addition to being able to see the data that's there, we also provided a mechanism for people to contribute suggestions for either Martech solutions we missed, ones that need to be updated, ones that had gone away. And yeah, you know, actually this inaugural episode here seemed like a great time to check in and see, like, okay, well, what were these submissions like for the first few months? Jeff, you want to drum roll? This is
yeah. So this is you know, it's a relatively late breaking. You know, we looked at what was coming in. And, you know, we've got almost 200, you know, submissions that have come in here, and where most of the stuff is new stuff. It keeps coming. And I think we've talked about this, but there's still more out there, and there's still more out there that we continue to discover, in addition to getting the contributions from the community. So yeah, 51 updates, and a few acquires, and a couple that have disappeared. But the bottom line is, it's still growth. It's still growing.
And I want to thank you and your team for also, yeah, working up till even last night here to, you know, get these updates reflected in the current database. So yeah, listeners, if you want the latest list here, you can go to martech5000.com. And if you see things we've either missed or need to be updated, we really appreciate you contributing. But yeah, I asked Jeff to, like, even just pick like one company, because people are like, okay, there's 8,000, like, you know, like, what else could you possibly add, you know, on top of this? And it turns out, I mean, you look at these entries and there's just some incredible innovation happening across every corner of this industry. Like, this was the one you picked, Jeff, right? Tessitura?
Yeah, Tessitura. So had never heard of it before. And actually this was something that was not a direct submission. This just is something that was just discovered just through random conversations. This is a platform that's been around for 20 years. It actually came out of the Met Opera. They had started to build a system, and now it is now used globally. It is essentially CRM and a whole suite of you know, marketing and back office technology for the performing arts organization industry, mostly nonprofits. And the interesting thing about this company is that it itself is a co-op model. The software users are the owners of this platform. And it's an amazing experience of something that I think is indicative of the fact that this 8,000 or so that we have collected and that people have contributed to in this database, I really think it just scratches the surface. There is so much more out there, especially in the niche areas.
Yeah.
that's out there. And I'm sure, Anita, I'm sure you've seen this as well.
Absolutely. And I think, we should take a moment and pause and realize that 187 new submissions that you have is just in a few month period, right? So the landscape was launched, early May, late April. And between then and now, it's quite extraordinary. And yes, I agree with you. I mean, we're finding exactly the same thing.
Cool. Well, great. So everyone came here thinking like, how do we deal with 8,000 Martech solutions? And our main advice to them is, well, it's not 8,000 you have to worry about. It's 80,000, who knows? All right. So it's interesting. Like, again, like obviously like one of the common debates here is like, why is this happening? I mean, like, why isn't this more consolidated? And I think there's a couple answers to that. So actually the short answer is the industry is actually a lot more consolidated than that crazy landscape would seem to suggest, because not all the companies on that landscape are equal in size. I mean, if you really just look at, from a market share perspective, there's a relatively small number of major players in the marketing tech industry. These are mostly public companies. I look at this landscape as a long tail where, yeah, the number of companies in the head of the tail, are actually relatively consolidated. But then as you start to go down that tail, you'll certainly have larger category leaders, among the different categories on that landscape. But yeah, you quickly just get into these thousands of specialist apps. And to be honest, yeah, the landscape doesn't even attempt to cover what would almost be considered like the really long tail of what is now tens of thousands, much more highly specialized ecosystem apps. I mean, like, for instance, the WordPress ecosystem has something like 60,000 plugins available for it. And, I tried to talk Jeff into like mapping all 60,000 into the landscape, but I couldn't get you to go for that, could I? So I want to actually just take about 10 minutes here to like walk through, because I promised this show, like we'll have like, some particularly nerdy sections. I mean, nerdy in the context of the rest of it. So this is the particularly nerdy section to try and just walk through a couple slides, trying to explain what the dynamic is that's even driving, really from the supply side, all these new technologies that keep appearing. And so what I tried to do was map out a model, that looks at software as a service. We'll limit this just to SaaS, is actually being several different layers of solutions that really do build on each other. And so I'll go into a slightly more detailed version of this slide here. So if we look at this on a spectrum, from the bottom of this graph to the top, the bottom is really about these general purpose cloud infrastructure providers. So this is Amazon, it's Microsoft Azure, it's Google Cloud, in APAC, it's Alibaba, and so that space is actually highly consolidated, right? I mean, I think Amazon has by far the largest, share there with AWS, and these are all about platforms that are designed for developers to be able to really quickly and easily, launch apps on top of all these foundational services. There's another category I think is a little bit different on top of that. I call them service platforms. And so these are companies like, Stripe for payment processing, or Twilio, for communications, that again they're primarily designed to serve developers, but they make it really easy for a developer to call some APIs and all of a sudden in their application be able to pull in all this incredible capability. I mean, Stripe has just made it so easy to like handle payment processing inside any app. I mean, really, like, you can get these things implemented, in a matter of hours. Now, on top of that, you start to get to app platforms. And these are things like, I think of, HubSpot and Salesforce and ServiceNow and Shopify. And, for those of us who are actually, working in marketing, right, this tends to be the layer at which we start to really recognize, okay, yeah, I'm using, this company, this app platform for these capabilities. Maybe I'm using Xero for my, accounting system. And this is where it starts to primarily get into serving more business users. But then on top of that, you know, these app platforms have been growing their own little ecosystems, you know, around them of apps that are being built to either integrate or actually even just, you know, built specifically for a particular app platform. You know, we'd recently celebrated at HubSpot, you know, over 500 apps, you know, in our own app marketplace, you know, some integrating with other specialist apps that work with multiple platforms, some that were built just for HubSpot. You know, and as you start to keep going up and up the stack, you know, a couple things are happening. So first of all, you're moving from, at the bottom of that stack was just, you know, general purpose infrastructure, right? I mean, almost any business that's going to leverage cloud leverages one of these common cloud platforms. But as you keep going up and up, you get more and more specialized, you know, and then these specialist apps, yeah, I mean, are really able to solve very specific needs. You could argue Zoom, so we're doing this in Zoom, is kind of a specialist app, although as you sometimes see when specialist apps become really large and popular, they also start to move to become more platforms. So Zoom has, you know, opened up their APIs and created a marketplace for other specialist apps on top of Zoom. But what's interesting is then if you even go one level up beyond packaged products, you're seeing that so many businesses are then leveraging this stack of platform capabilities to build their own little add-ons that are very specific to their particular operations. You know, and, you know, if you look at the far left of this graph, one of the things you'll see is like, okay, now we're really going from general purpose infrastructure to highly business specific logic. We're also going up the scale in the quantity of these things that exist. So you could argue there's maybe half a dozen major cloud platforms, maybe a couple dozen more that are, you know, second tier players. But you go all the way up to, you know, app platforms and specialist apps with the Martech, just in Martech, right? That's where we get our 8,000. But then going above that, even to custom apps, you know, if you look up things like, you know, on GitHub, you know, the millions of repositories are there. You know, Amazon, you know, has millions of organizations, you know, that are building software on top of their foundation. I mean, you just go through the math and you realize, okay, we are really at a case where there are millions of apps out there at that top level. And part of why this is possible, like why you have this explosion of all these apps, is because, you know, this stack of SaaS platform capability, it really allows developers to stand on the shoulders of giants, you know, so the things that we, you know, build on top of, say, AWS, you know, and then I can leverage in service platforms like Twilio and Stripe. And then, yeah, if I'm using an app platform, you know, like HubSpot, I might be able to leverage all of their capabilities. Like, why should I reinvent, you know, how I manage, you know, CRM or, you know, email, you know, marketing management, just build on top of that. And then specialist apps, even if they're specialist apps, many of them still have APIs, you know, to the point where someone who's a little more technical at an organization looking to build a custom app for like, okay, this is the very specific way I want some sort of process or workflow or app to work for my business, can build on top of all of this. And I mean, we could spend several hours digging into this really deeply, but I just want to give you one taste of like, even if you just go into AWS, even if you're not a developer, go to their website, you know, and go to their product section. Now this is their products page. It's important to know all these things that you see, all these icons, these are not the actual products. These are just categories of products. Like if we click on the machine learning one, right? This is the entire collection of like machine learning services that AWS offers, you know, in a form that makes it just super easy for any developer to plug into. And so this is my last slide on this, and we'll pull out of the super nerdy section, and yeah, again, to more of the conversation here. But this is where you get this really interesting relationship between the consolidation of major cloud platforms and even major service platforms has now made it so easy for specialist apps and custom apps to be able to take advantage of that capability, that the more consolidation there is and the more growth there is on those, you know, core platforms, actually you end up seeing a larger and larger explosion of specialist apps and custom apps on top of it. And I think app platforms play a little bit of a unique role here, because on one level, just like the cloud platforms and the service platforms, they provide a set of capabilities that any other developer can, stand on the shoulders of a giant. But very often, because these app platforms are focused on a particular space, like marketing, if it's marketing for SMBs or marketing for enterprises, or if it's, accounting platforms, they have a relationship with the business user community around that function. And so as those app platforms have moved to create their own app marketplaces, they actually end up creating this really cool mechanism for business users in that particular space to then be able to discover and do some matching with the specialist apps that will best serve them. So last point I wanted to make on this was the word platform, gets thrown around a lot. And when I was doing this graph, I felt like there's an opportunity to describe platform in a very quantitative way, which is a platform is something that feeds the creation of more apps on top of it than other competitors that it's consolidating at its level. So AWS might be competing the heck out of, other cloud platforms, and between Microsoft and Google and Amazon, who's going to be left there, right? But even as they consolidate that space, they're empowering far, far, far more app creators on top of it, And so again, this is a bit of that dynamic you're seeing with the MarTech landscape is, yes, consolidation is happening. Even at the app platform level, consolidation is happening. But by the nature of these platforms, enabling other developers and providing discovery mechanisms through marketplaces, they're actually enabling the creation of many more than they're removing. All right, so if you've got questions on this, save them. We're going to, jump into that in a bit. But I want to first take a moment to talk a little bit more deeply with Anita, who has been, at the forefront of watching this explosion of marketing technology solutions, and with her work at Cabinet M, how marketers are actually organizing and managing this stack. So Anita, you want to tell us a little bit about Cabinet M first?
Sure. Okay, so let me start by saying we describe ourselves as a marketing technology platform. So in your definition of platform, that's probably a little aspirational, but it's definitely heading, we're heading in the direction to own that label. We are focused on making it easy for marketing teams to manage their technology use, spend, performance, and their strategy. So companies come onto our site and we give them all the tools they need to manage and report on what's going on with their tech stack.
So as part of that, like you've got your own database, that you've curated of all these different MarTech solutions. You keep hearing about more and more from your own customers. Like, what's your take on this whole like expansion consolidation dynamic in the industry?
So I think it's a few things. Yes, we have a very large database, and just like you guys, we're uncovering more and more. Every time somebody comes on to build a stack on our platform, we get a request to add 10 to 20 more products. So I think part of it is surfacing of products that we didn't know about, but also part of it is looking at what marketing teams consider marketing technology, right? So there may be some categories that you and I wouldn't necessarily have put in marketing technology that appear on stacks. So I think what I see within a stack is contraction and expansion, but within the industry, I don't see great consolidation. And I don't know that we will, because early on, we talked to some very large companies about just that and their perceptions. And somebody from a very, very large company said to me, come on, I need to look at this landscape. Best case, we're going to be able to buy 10 companies a year, best case, in a good year. And there are only a finite number of us that can make that acquisition. So when you're talking about, a landscape that is 8,000, 10,000, 20,000 wide, you're not going to see this shrink down to, a handful of products. So, and I think the other thing is that innovation most often comes outside of these big established companies, and as our behavior changes, there's going to be need for new technologies to connect with our customers and how they're behaving today. So we're going to continue to see a lot of innovation. And I think that's why it's so exciting to be in this industry and be a part of this.
So Jeff, you actually have a very personal story on this too. It sort of skipped over in the introduction there that aside from Martech Landscapes, turns out that's not actually your company's like full-time profession. You've also created a
It's a side
specialist
effect.
app.
It's a side
It
effect.
sometimes feels that way. I understand, believe me. But you created a specialist app, Blue Green Analytics. And I think it's actually a great example of this sort of innovation that happens outside of the context of like the major marketing platforms. Can you just talk a little bit about that? How that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Blue Green have been around for about 11 years, and for most of our existence, we started creating and manually mapping customer journey flows, particularly on site flows, and looking at engagement rates, conversion rates, traffic, where's the traffic going, what's working, what's not working. And we kept doing this on a manual level, and eventually we were like, we have to stop doing this customer journey analysis on a manual level. So we went to the landscape, which at the time, we had not started helping you out build. You were still building it manually in PowerPoint. And we looked to see what was out there. And there was no customer journey category in the landscape at the time. And actually, there still isn't yet a customer journey category in the landscape. It might be a future subcategory. We could not find anything to meet our needs. So our original plan was to go find something that was out there. So we decided to create it. And so we started that process a few years ago. And now, and then we're seeing this category of customer journey software emerging. And there are many different categories within customer journey that are emerging. There's orchestration. There's customer journeys that look at individual user recordings. There's customer journey analytics that look at just the page heat maps. I mean, there's tons of products out there in this area. And I think this dynamic of, enabling the creation, the easy, more rapid creation of tools. In other words, you could make an argument, people are creating tools because they can, but I think people are also creating tools because of the demand. That was our situation. We needed something to scratch our own itch, and felt there's a market demand for it, and we're seeing that emerging now. So, there is this amazing, what I would almost call it is like a compound network effect that is happening, both in the ability to create and in the fact that there is a demand for use. So there's the creation and there's the utilization. And there's a ton of value that gets created in that. And I love this framework, by the way, Scott. You might call it, super nerdy, but frankly, I love frameworks that simplify and simplify in understanding. And this is a really good one. And we were talking about, how did we build this? How do we build our software? What aspects of these of this?
Like you stood on the shoulders of giants too, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, just like everybody, right? So, I don't know if you want to bring that graphic back up, but at the bottom, you got the cloud platforms. We're using AWS, we're using Google. And in that service platform area, that's growing for us. We've started using Stripe there. We've got Elasticsearch, Docker, Nginx, Puppeteer.
Like a walking case study of cloud platform, service platforms. And
then in the app platforms area, this is I think probably the most exciting thing, and I think it does help explain the dynamic here of this sort of compound network effect. So we're in the HubSpot marketplace app ecosystem. Before we even started building the tool, we knew we wanted to make sure we were going to be in the Telium and Insighten ecosystems, Google Tag Manager, Adobe, etc., WordPress, etc., because that's where you know, our tool works by a simple tag, and that's where the tags are. That joke, by the way, earlier, I think is another argument for tag management.
I'll contact Scott Brinker #2 and see what he says. Well,
so that app, you know, that app platform area is a mechanism for growth. That is a real strong growth vehicle, and I think it's both an accidental growth vehicle and a purposeful growth vehicle, and we're really thinking about that and working that, you know, that app platform part of that that dimension, that spectrum, in a very intentional way.
So actually, like Anita, I know you as well. Like I kind of like glossed over this, but like Cabinet M is also a SaaS app, and so I assume built yeah, you know, in this way too. But
exactly.
I'd love to like get your perspective on yeah. So we've kind of leaned pretty heavy on like the supply dynamics of like why it's just so easy for this supply to expand. But if you could give us just a little perspective on the demand side of this too, because again, like you have so many of your customers who are using this to like organize their Martech stacks. What's your sense of just the relationship marketers have with Martech now? Is this like shiny object, oh, we'll just try random stuff? Is it like we hate marketing technology, if we could get down to one product, we'd be thrilled? Or is there some like interesting balance in the middle? And what do you see some of your best customers, how do they kind of approach that thought of what the stack should even be?
Yeah, so I think the shiny object will never go away. I think it's something that's genetically programmed inside marketers. But what we're seeing now, particularly because of the environment we're in, is this kind of move to really evaluating all of the elements in the stack and making sure that there's return on investment from all of them. So it's not so much let's shrink the stack down as it is, do we have the right stack? Are we getting the return? You know, as we went into the pandemic, stacks froze, spend froze. We're seeing, you know, thaws in that now, and we're seeing people really working inside their stacks. So what we see is we don't see anybody in our environment evaluating very large platforms at the moment. And I think that's a function of learning how to work remotely with their teams and not being ready to take on something like that remotely yet. But I think we'll get back to that in the next year. We see a lot of emphasis on workflow technology and adding and upgrading for obvious reasons. We see a lot of senior level pressure on marketing technology, right? So now the CFO wants to know where all that money's going and why. We see there's this kind of push-pull between demand and brand. So if you're a type of company that has been hit hard by this pandemic and you're not seeing sales right now, what does that do to your stack? Do you need to put more tools in place to just ride through this and focus on brand? So, you know, we're kind of seeing these iterations. We are not seeing stacks shrink yet. That may come, but we're not seeing them shrink. We are seeing CMO and marketing ops jobs hit. And I think that's a function of, oh, when you have to reduce expenses, hit marketing first, which frustrates the hell out of me. I think it's so friggin' short.
Marketer on the planet, yes.
Yeah, I think it's so short-sighted because at the end of the day, I think, you know, how you position, sell, market your product is going to be key to getting through all of these frustrating times. But we do see strategy has kind of been trumped by survival. Right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and we
if
also
you're not alive,
see
the strategy doesn't work very well.
Exactly. We're also seeing companies reaching out to Martech consultancies, and there are a lot of specialist Martech consultancies, and some of the larger platform players have consulting arms, and asking for their help with this kind of audit of where they are. So
Yeah,
lots of activity.
I think we're gonna have to do a whole episode just on like, yeah, the Martech services industry around this, or probably like a whole season. It's a lot of cool stuff. Well, listen, I want to make sure we get some time to bring in a few folks who were kind enough to join us for the live studio audience. But before I do that, so the way we work the sponsorships here for this first season of the Martech show is basically saying, all right, anyone who wants to sponsor this, if you're willing to raise your hand and say you will make a meaningful donation to some nonprofit cause that's either going to be able to help people, you know, who are making their way through pandemic crazy 2020, or also, yeah, just, you know, helping with the challenges of racial justice that have, you know, also, yeah, just become one of the things here that we're collectively trying to work through in 2020. And so really appreciate Anita was like the first person to like raise her hand and said, we'd love to do this, you know, and the nonprofit cause, you know, she wanted to sponsor for this was really amazing. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just share a little bit about this, Anita?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. I mean, this was a no-brainer for us. We were very excited to do this. So we chose Facing History. So they are an education company that are dedicated to battling racism, anti-Semitism, stereotyping, and prejudice. And so they do teacher training and provide educational materials for middle school and high school students, helping them connect to past moments in history where we've seen hatred and bigotry and the human behavior around that, and to really get these students to think outside the box and to think for themselves and to help them confront the dangers of that type of behavior. So we love this charity. We love because it's educational, but we love it because it's focused on the next generation. And I think, you know, they're our biggest, greatest hope. And I also like it because it aligns with that old proverb, give a man to fish and you feed him for a day, but teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I think these guys are doing great work. So we're really pleased that we were able to give money to this charity on your behalf.
Well, very nice. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Listeners, would really encourage you to go check out Facing History. And certainly if you want to give just based on its premise alone, that would be awesome. But also, yeah, if you found this show helpful and, you know, would like to leave a tip, please send the tip to Facing History. Really appreciate it. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes or so here left. What I wanted to do was give us a chance to promote a few folks from our audience. So if you're asking questions in the Q&A, I'm going to try and just bring you up to be here on video if you wanted. Carlos Doughty, over in the UK. Do you want to ask your question, Carlos? Got you off guard.
Oh,
You're like, whoa, wait. What do you mean?
I see you've gone real live. I just threw the message out there. I thought you were going to ask. Thank you. Great show, first of all, and really love the initiative. It's fantastic. I was going to ask Jeff, is 2021 going to be the year of the Joe?
All right,
Are
so
you going to include that as a category now?
yes, so JOE is an acronym for?
Journey orchestration engines.
Journey orchestration engines. Hey, it could be a subcategory. I think we first need the customer journey or the journey category, right? Or subcategory. I don't think we have a journey subcategory yet.
Let's not go into the category debate. But like the journey orchestration space, I think it's interesting. Are we going to see more players there? I mean, Carlos, what do you feel is like missing there? Oh, and by the way, those of you in the audience listening, if you don't know Carlos, he is the mastermind behind the Martech Alliance, also creates a version of the Martech landscape for the UK, for the APAC region. So yeah, part of promoting him here is like, yeah, he knows as much about Martech industry dynamics as anyone. I mean, what do you see, Carlos?
Well, actually, I think it's really interesting that the Real Story Group, I think, those were the guys that have been carrying a lot of the category of journey orchestration engines, which I think is a really interesting one. Whilst I do think it's a category, but I think the blurriness between where that stops and starts, where there's an omni-channel platform, where there's a CDP, I think it's still incredibly blurry. But I do think there's certainly space for it, and I think increasingly there are a lot of solutions that are more around understanding the analytics and specifically what that journey looks like beginning to end and how it can be optimized, that do differ significantly enough from some of the functionality and features you might get in a CDP or you might get in a marketing cloud or marketing automation platform.
So I want to also promote another audience member, Akbar Jafar. You had a great question you'd submit into the Q&A. Do you want to join us live to ask your question for Anita?
Sure. Hey, Scott. So Anita, I really like and I appreciate the comment that you made about the mass consolidation. I think that there's just way too many players to do that. But I wanted to ask you a question. Do you feel that there will be consolidation, but across lines of thematic offerings like ABM or marketing automation or for example, like content management? Thoughts?
Yeah, so so there are acquisitions that are happening all through the landscape, but I don't see great consolidation in any key category. There are dominant players in categories, but if you just take the CRM category, for example, I think we have on our platform, we have 40 or 50 CRMs, and people are still launching CRM products. They're still launching email products. So I don't think you're going to see those collapse down to 5 players, any of these. But you will see there is acquisition happening. I mean, this is a landscape ripe for acquisition, and particularly, I think there are some places where you could do a 1 + 1 = 3 set of acquisitions, but I wouldn't say, I haven't seen it in any category. And I know that's not logical, but I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I think part of this too is it's just, I kind of like didn't completely clarify this in this model, but that stack of platforms, like the capabilities and the services that are available on cloud platforms and service platforms, part of it is they're just so incredibly inexpensive. Like the capital cost requirements and the operating cost requirements for software businesses these days, I mean, it's just, it's a tiny fraction, of what it was even like 10 years ago. And so I think it's interesting. There's some good and bad about that. I think the challenge is if you end up with a bunch of these products that are they all basically do the same thing, but yeah, the dynamics are such that, you can't consolidate them all into one because just nobody has enough appetite to, swallow it all. But also, yeah, because of the cost dynamics, being so low on the operating costs of small SaaS businesses, as these businesses can, as long as they're keeping their set of customers happy and working for them, they can exist for a long time, which again, you could argue that's a challenge. I think where it turns to be more of a benefit is, again, if you look at those smaller SaaS companies, the degree to which they are able to specialize or differentiate, or bring capabilities that are different than the more commoditized capabilities, that's where I think there's actually a lot of like net value benefit to the entire industry. But yeah, for Anita's, answer there, it's just, yeah, even at the, generalist horizontal, feature capability, yeah, there's just a lot out there that isn't going to, go away quickly.
There also seems to be a trend toward, products that move down from app level, and they will move their way down toward platforming. So there probably can be more platforming in ABM, more platforming that'll happen in market. There obviously has been a ton of platforming in marketing automation. Content management as well, I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like consolidation at the platform level almost is guaranteed to happen, and part of that comes down to that in order to even have an ecosystem, that comes around you, you need to have enough scale and enough stability that, those dynamics work, that you become a viable distribution channel, for other specialist apps. So I do think, yeah, seeing more consolidation there is reasonable. But again, if you're just counting total number of Martech solutions in the world, yeah, the dynamics all seem poised to continue to have a lot of growth on specialist apps. So, wow, listen, thank you, Akbar and Carlos, for joining in on us. We have easily come to our 45-minute time here. I want to thank Jeff and Anita for joining me as well. Thanks to all of you for putting up with the adventures of a first episode. We'll keep learning and experimenting with the format here. Our next show is going to be recording live on September 4th at 11 a.m. With the special guest David Robb, as I would call it, Insights from the CDP Whisperer. So if you're able to join us for that, we hope we will see you then. And wow, thank you. Have a wonderful day and take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Scott. Bye.